the 20th century. Iran's last Shah, dressed in a sharp European suit, sits at a polished wooden desk. In his hand, not a scepter, but an ordinary pen. With a single stroke, he signs a decree meant to become his defining legacy. But it's not about oil, not a military reform, it's a decree about time itself. Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi abolishes the Islamic calendar, a system that had measured time for nearly 14 centuries. Instead, he orders his nation to start counting years anew. The starting point? Not the birth of the prophet, but the founding of the first Persian Empire by the Achaemenid dynasty 2,500 years ago. It was an act of unimaginable historical boldness, a leap across 1,500 years of Islamic culture to directly link modern, westernized Iran with its pre-Islamic imperial past. He wanted the world to see his country not just as another Middle Eastern state, but as the heir to a civilization that taught the Greeks and challenged Rome. And he was right. The country's very name, Iran, used by its people for centuries, predates the Greek exonym Persia by far. It means land of the Aryans, with roots stretching deep into the ancient past the last Shah so desperately invoked. This gesture exposes Iran's central paradox. An empire that 2,500 years ago granted people's freedom of religion now stands as a symbol of rigid theocracy. A civilization that gifted the world its most intricate poetry and science now finds itself trapped in isolation. Next, we'll explore how geography shaped the first superpower. Step by step, we'll trace the path from Cyrus the Great's clay tablets to a captured Roman emperor kneeling before a Persian king. You'll witness the forging of a unique survival code, one that let this civilization not just endure, but absorb and transform its fiercest conquerors. And the question that looms over all of this, how will Persian identity survive the complete destruction of its state religion and the invasion of foreigners bringing an entirely new god? To grasp the birth of this power, you have to look not at the people, but at the land. The Iranian plateau isn't just a stretch of territory. It's a colossal natural fortress, rising nearly 5,000 feet above sea level, surrounded on all sides by impassable mountain ranges. The air is dry and scorched by the sun, with endless salt deserts stretching across the center. It feels like a place built for isolation. Yet, this harsh geography turned it into the heart of the ancient world. The plateau became a crucial crossroads linking four great centers of civilization: the Mediterranean to the west, India and China to the east, and the steppes of Central Asia to the north. Any caravan, any goods, any army moving east to west, or west to east, had to either battle through the mountains or pass through Iran. This wasn't a choice. It was an unavoidable reality. For thousands of years before silk appeared, caravans carried lapis lazuli from the high-altitude mines of the Pamir Mountains along these paths. This deep blue stone, more valuable than gold in Egypt and Mesopotamia, could reach those lands only one way, through the hands of the tribes controlling the plateau. Later, crucial branches of the Great Silk Road would stretch through this very region. Holding power here meant controlling the valve that regulated economies from Rome all the way to Han China. Geography shaped Iran's fate. It had to be either a great transit empire or a battleground for others. The first to recognize this potential and turn it into a global project were the Achaemenids. Their founder, Cyrus the Great, didn't just build an empire. He set a standard for governance that others would try to copy for the next 2,000 years. At a time when conquering armies typically slaughtered the defeated and enslaved the survivors, Cyrus did something unimaginable. After capturing Babylon, he didn't destroy the city. Instead, he freed the peoples who had been forcibly relocated there by Babylonian kings. The most famous example? The Jews, held captive in what became known as the Babylonian exile. Cyrus didn't merely allow them to leave, he funded their journey home in the rebuilding of the Jerusalem temple. This act of religious tolerance was so unprecedented that Cyrus earned a place in the Old Testament as God's anointed. Consider this. In a region now known for deep religious conflicts 2,500 years ago, a ruler established multiculturalism and freedom of conscience as official state policy. But this vision rested on a backbone of ironclad logistics. To connect their vast empire, the Persians built the Royal Road, a transport artery stretching over 2,500 kilometers, paved with stone and divided into precise segments. Every 25 to 30 kilometers, a relay station stood ready. There were 111 of these stations in total. Each provided fresh horses, supplies, water, and guards. Imperial messengers raced without pause, swapping tired horses for fresh ones, so news from the farthest provinces reached the capital in just 7 to 9 days. To put that in perspective, in the 18th century, a letter from Rome to Paris took weeks to arrive. The Achaemenids created the world's first rapid communication system, stitching enormous territories into a single, manageable whole. Tolerance as ideology and roads as technology. This was the formula of their power. Empires fall, but geography endures. Whoever controls the bridge controls the world. When Alexander the Great toppled the Achaemenid Empire and his successors weakened, the Holy Ground didn't stay empty for long. The Parthians stepped in, once nomads, now masterful horse archers. They didn't inherit the Achaemenids' bloodline, but their role, becoming the chief customs keepers at the crossroads of civilizations. This made them the main rivals of the West's rising superpower, Rome. Conflict was inevitable. Silk became the era's prized commodity. This delicate thread, spun in China, transformed into a symbol of status, wealth, and decadence in Rome. The Roman elite paid any price for it, yet the entire flow of gold passed through Parthian hands. Every bale of silk crossing their borders came with a tariff. Parthia sat astride the vital trade route linking the world's two biggest producers and consumers. They grew rich from controlling that flow. For Rome, this was unbearable. Not just an economic insult, but a strategic weakness. This sparked the Roman-Parthian Wars. They stretched from the 1st century BC to the 3rd century AD, almost 300 years. It wasn't a single conflict, but a series of brutal, exhausting campaigns with shifting fortunes. Roman legions, undefeated in Europe, found themselves bogged down in the Iranian deserts. They struggled against Parthia's light cavalry, which showered them with arrows and vanished beyond the horizon before they could strike back. 3 centuries of fierce struggle to control global trade. The Parthians wore down Rome, but it was their successors, the new Persian Sasanian dynasty, who dealt the decisive blow. They didn't just replace the Parthians in power, they harnessed centuries of strength and experience, then unleashed it against the West. The climax of this struggle is carved in stone. Near the ancient city of Persepolis, the rock reliefs at Nakshi Rustam tell the story. One shows the Persian king Shapur I, seated on horseback in full royal regalia. Before him stand 3 Roman emperors in humbled poses. One fell in battle. Another kneels begging for mercy. The third, Emperor Valerian Shapur, holds captive by the hand. In the year 260, the Persian army didn't just defeat the Romans. They captured their reigning emperor alive. A living god, ruler of half the world. Imagine the shock the Roman Empire felt. It's like if, during the Cold War, Soviet troops captured the President of the United States. Legend has it that Shapur used the captured emperor as a living footstool, stepping on his back to mount his horse. This image, the Roman emperor kneeling before the Persian king, became a powerful symbol of Iran's absolute dominance. The Sasanian era was a golden age. A city empire with dense populations, advanced science, astronomy, and medicine, while Europe slowly slipped into the Dark Ages. At the heart of this civilization lay a unique spiritual code, Zoroastrianism. Their sacred text, the Avesta, was finalized and canonized under the Sasanians. Zoroastrians believed the world was a battlefield between good and evil, light and darkness. They thought people had to stand with the forces of good. This belief shaped every part of their lives, even how they faced death. They saw earth, water, and fire as sacred elements that death must not contaminate. So instead of burying or burning their dead, they built round, roofless stone structures on hills, called Towers of Silence. They placed the bodies there, leaving them to the vultures. The birds quickly stripped the flesh from the bones, keeping the sacred elements pure. To an outsider, this ritual might seem shocking, but for the Zoroastrians it was the highest act of devotion, a way to live in harmony with nature. The scene freezes. A great empire stands at the height of its power. Its cities thrive, armies seem unstoppable, and faith feels eternal. Priests keep the eternal flame burning in the temples of Ahura Mazda. Towers of silence perch atop hills, patiently awaiting new bodies, closing the sacred cycle of life and death. This empire of cities, science, and faith feels as unshakable as the cliffs that bear its glory, until on the horizon, riders emerge from the dust of the Arabian desert, carrying a completely different god under green banners. Conquest rarely marks the end of a story. More often, it kicks off a new, far more tangled chapter. Arab horsemen burst out of the desert sands and crushed the Sasanian army, one of the two great superpowers of that era. A 1,000-year empire collapsed. The Zoroastrian temple fires burning for centuries were snuffed out. From the outside, it seemed like Persian civilization had vanished for good. Egypt fell, and Arabic became its voice. Syria fell and turned Arab. North Africa fell, and Berber languages gave way to Quranic Arabic. History seemed to suggest the same fate awaited Persia. Cities renamed, language forgotten, its people melting into the caliphate's melting pot. But that story didn't unfold. Persia embraced Islam, but it never became Arab. This isn't about the durability of weapons. It's about cold, hard economics. The early caliphs didn't rush to force their subjects into the new faith. The reason? Money. Under Islamic law, non-Muslims, including Zoroastrians, paid a special poll tax called the jizya. These taxes funded the Arab military elite. As long as Persians kept their old religion, they filled the treasury with silver. But mass conversions would have punched a hole straight through the budget. Contrary to popular myths, the conquerors built a system where keeping your old beliefs actually worked in their favor. This gave Persian culture its most precious gift: time. A breather. A chance not just to survive, but to prepare a response. And they planned to fight back, not with swords, but with words and ideas. The answer didn't come in a day, it took a century, and it didn't look like a rebellion of the conquered. Instead, it was a quiet coup within the system itself. The Umayyads, who had placed their capital in Damascus, ruled the caliphate like an exclusive club for Arabs. Persians and other non-Arab Muslims were second-class citizens. They paid taxes, fought in wars, but were barred from the halls of power. Resentment simmered for years, especially in Khorasan, the eastern province that had once been the heart of Persia. It was there that Abu Muslim raised the banner of revolt under the black flags of the Abbasids. From the outside, it looked like a simple change from one Arab dynasty to another. But beneath the surface, a hidden Persian revolution was unfolding. Behind the new caliphs stood the entire Persian bureaucratic machine: officials, generals, and local nobility. They used the Abbasids as a battering ram to unseat the Umayyads. But once they succeeded, the rules of the game changed forever. The capital moved from Damascus to Baghdad, a city built almost on the ruins of ancient Ctesiphon. Power shifted from the Mediterranean to Mesopotamia, straight into the orbit of Persian culture. From that point on, Persian influence poured into the very core of the Islamic world. Palace etiquette, government administration, titles, even clothing styles, all began to mirror Sasanian models. Modest Arab sheikhs gave way to grand ceremonies, viziers, and eunuchs, while the caliph increasingly resembled an ancient shahanshah. Under the Abbasids, Islam stopped being a religion exclusive to the Arab military elite. It became a universal faith embraced by all peoples. Muslim Persians gained access to every position of power. They didn't just reclaim lost ground, they took control of the empire from within. Formerly, the victors sat in Baghdad, but the machinery of state ran on Persian templates. This is the highest form of assimilation. When the conquered adopt the customs of the conqueror, and the conqueror, without realizing it, begins to live by the rules of the conquered. The Persians won the political battle, but a deeper threat still loomed: cultural erasure. Arabic had firmly taken hold as the language of religion, science, and administration. Persian risked fading away forever, sinking into obscurity like ancient Egyptian or Akkadian. In this critical moment, a man stepped onto the stage, a figure whose impact rivaled founding a new dynasty: Ferdowsi. For 30 years, he dedicated himself to one mission: gathering scattered myths, legends, and chronicles of pre-Islamic Persia and weaving them into a single poetic epic. He wrote in pure Persian, deliberately cutting out Arabic words. His Shahnameh, or Book of Kings, became more than a literary monument. It was an act of saving a nation's memory. 60,000 rhymed verses, an epic far longer than both the Iliad and the Odyssey combined. Ferdowsi built an ark that preserved the language, history, and soul of his people from the tides of Arabization. He restored the Persians' heroes, Rustam, Siavash, ancient kings. He reminded them who they were before Islam. Thanks to the Shahnameh, Persian didn't just survive. It flourished, becoming one of the greatest poetic languages in the world. This cultural power proved just as mighty as any army. Persian poetry, miniature art, architecture, and philosophy set the standard across a vast region. When Turkic dynasties forged their empires, they modeled themselves on Persian traditions. The Ottoman Empire and the Mughal rulers of India lived within this framework. Sultans in Istanbul and Padishahs in Delhi commissioned lavish Shahnameh manuscripts and composed poetry in Persian. It became the language of high culture, from the Balkans to Bengal. Though Iran lost its military edge, it conquered its conquerors and their neighbors through sheer cultural genius. But cultural dominance alone wasn't enough. To reclaim superpower status, the country needed a new foundation, not ink but gunpowder. Military strength and full sovereignty returned in the 16th century with the rise of the Safavid dynasty. For the first time in nearly 1,000 years, Iran was ruled by a native Persian line once again. They introduced two major changes that transformed the country beyond recognition. Shiism as the state religion, which set Iran apart from the Sunni majority, and the widespread use of firearms. The Safavids built what historians call a classic gunpowder empire. Cannons and muskets gave them an edge previous rulers lacked. They crushed rebellious tribal leaders and centralized all power under the Shah. Fortress walls crumbled to dust under artillery fire. The feudal order, once carved in stone, collapsed. In its place rose absolute monarchy, backed by a professional army armed with rifles. This power reached its peak under Shah Abbas I. He transformed Isfahan into one of the most stunning cities on the planet. Vast squares, mosques covered in brilliant blue tiles, bustling bazaars alive with energy. But behind this dazzling facade lay iron will and ruthless determination. To strengthen the economy and secure the borders, Shah Abbas enforced a policy of mass deportations. Hundreds of thousands of people, entire nations, mostly Christian Armenians and Georgians, were forcibly uprooted from the Caucasus and pushed deep into the heart of the country. This was merciless state engineering. Men, women, and children marched on foot across mountains and scorched steppes. Thousands perished along the way. The goal was twofold: to empty the borderlands, creating a buffer zone against the Ottomans, and to harness the skills of these settlers to develop the empire. Armenian merchants, known for their business acumen, were resettled in a new district of Isfahan and granted a monopoly on silk, turning them into a tool for filling the royal treasury. Shah Abbas restored Iran's status as a great power, but the price of that rise was paid in the blood and tears of hundreds of thousands. The Safavid Empire brought Iran centuries of stability, but the world outside was changing too fast. While the Persian Shahs honed their gunpowder armies, Europe was charging into the Industrial Revolution. Steam engines, machine tools, and rifled muskets created a technological gap that no bravery or old tactics could close. In the 19th century, Iran, ruled by the faltering Qajars, faced this new reality head-on. The Russian Empire pressed from the north. The British advanced from the south. The first blow came through a series of wars with Russia. Persia's army, still relying on cavalry charges and outdated cannons, suffered defeat after defeat. Humiliating peace treaties severed Iran's hold over the Caucasus forever. The lands that make up today's Azerbaijan, Armenia, and parts of Georgia, territories intertwined with Iran for centuries, were handed over to St. Petersburg. It was a national disgrace, a brutal amputation of historic land, and that was just the beginning. Soon, Iran didn't become a battlefield. Instead, it turned into a silent, suffocating contest between London and St. Petersburg, a geopolitical struggle known as the Great Game. The empires never sent armies onto Persian soil. They simply carved the country into spheres of influence, like slicing up a cake. The north, including the capital, fell under Russia's unofficial control. The south, with its access to the Persian Gulf and routes to India, went to Britain. The former glory vanished. This empire, once capable of capturing Roman emperors and ruling from the Indus River to Egypt, had become a powerless pawn in foreign hands. The Qajar Shahs, desperate for gold, handed out concessions to foreigners, exclusive rights to mine resources, build roads, open banks, even collect customs duties. British and Russian ambassadors in Tehran acted like absolute rulers. Their word often carried more weight than the Shah's own decrees. The economy fell completely under foreign control. A proud people who had survived Arabs, Turks, and Mongols, absorbing and transforming their influences, now faced a new kind of oppression. Invisible, economic, and deeply humiliating. No armies burning cities. Instead, there were contracts filled with fine print, draining the nation's wealth. Consuls dictated the ministers' agendas. Russian Cossack brigades guarded the palace, while British gunboats patrolled the bay. The country was caught in a vice. British naval power pressing from the south, Russian bayonets closing in from the north. Only months remained before a social explosion would reshape forever the bond between the people and their rulers. The vice squeezing the country couldn't tighten forever. Sooner or later, either a bone would break, or the spring of anger would snap with terrifying force. The first crack didn't come from guns or political speeches. It smelled of tobacco. In 1890, the Shah, desperate for cash, sold a British major an exclusive monopoly on producing, selling, and exporting all tobacco in the country. Signed quietly inside the palace, the contract was supposed to fill the treasury. Instead, it lit a fuse. Outrage spread everywhere, from market merchants losing centuries-old livelihoods to farmers forced to sell their crops for next to nothing to outsiders. But the protest found its voice where no one expected it. A fatwa, a religious decree, came down from the highest ranks of the Shiite clergy, short and sharp. No exceptions. Smoking was declared a sin, on par with waging war against the hidden Imam. And then something happened that no decree, no army could ever achieve. Iran quit smoking, the entire nation. Overnight, the coals in tea houses went cold. The crackle of lighting pipes vanished from the bazaars. The most powerful blow struck at the heart of power itself. Women in the Shah's harem, the most untouchable corner of the state, deliberately smashed their precious hookahs adorned with silver and turquoise. This wasn't just an economic boycott. It was a moment of national unity, where religious authority openly challenged the Shah's secular regime and his foreign backers for the first time. Humiliated, the ruler had no choice but to back down and cancel the agreement. The tension snapped. For the first time, the people felt their own power. This victory sparked a chain reaction that, 16 years later, in 1906, erupted into the Constitutional Revolution. Iran became the first country in the Middle East to adopt a constitution. But this document was an odd creation, a legal centaur. It ran on the blood of European liberalism, borrowed almost entirely from Belgium's constitution. Yet, at its core lay Islam. Amendments introduced by the clergy guaranteed the supremacy of Sharia law. This hybrid of Quranic principles and European legal ideas was destined for internal conflict. It planted a ticking time bomb beneath the foundation of Iranian statehood, one that would count down for the next 70 years. This fragile sprout of democracy was doomed from the start. Soldiers' boots from the First World War crushed it, as Russia and Britain carved up the country once again. Then internal conflicts delivered the final blow. Out of this chaos and humiliation emerged a man who believed the nation needed more than bandages. It needed surgery, no anesthesia. His name was Reza Khan, an officer in the Persian Cossack Brigade. He watched his homeland, heir to great empires, become a doormat for foreign diplomats. He saw how outdated traditions and weak central power left the country vulnerable, and he decided the only way to save Iran was to wrench it out of the past by force. In 1921, he marched his troops into Tehran. 4 years later, he crowned himself Reza Shah Pahlavi, founding a new dynasty. His plan was ruthless and straightforward: rapid Westernization. He looked at Ataturk's Turkey and aimed to do the same, only faster and more radically. A total rebuilding of the nation began. He constructed roads, railways, and factories. He forged a modern army modeled after European forces. He opened secular schools and universities. In 1935, he issued a decree that echoed around the world. He demanded that all countries officially call his nation Iran, not Persia. Persia was a name from fairy tales given by the Greeks, exotic, fragile, and scented with carpets and spices. Iran, so meaning land of the Aryans, was an ancient stern name. It pointed to fierce ancestors, to strength, and to a racial kinship with European nations. It was a rebranding meant to declare, we are not a colonized land, we stand as equals. Yet the most painful change struck everyday life. The Shah banned women from wearing the hijab. Police tore scarves from women's heads in the streets. Any public place, cinemas, baths, that kept men and women separate faced huge fines. For many Iranians, this wasn't freedom. It was sacrilege. A public humiliation of their wives, sisters, and mothers. Reza Shah aimed to build a modern nation, but he did it by crushing its cultural roots. That sparked a deep, silent anger. He was building a new, powerful army, buying tanks, planes, artillery. He believed that a strong military would guarantee the sovereignty so cruelly trampled during the Great Game. He believed no foreign soldier would ever set foot on Iranian soil without his permission. That belief shattered to dust in just a few days in August 1941. The world was engulfed in the flames of the Second World War. Germany, with whom Reza Shah had maintained warm relations, seemed invincible, and Iran sat on what every warring side needed like air: oil. For Britain, Iranian oil was the lifeblood of its navy. For the Soviet Union, Iran was the Persian corridor, a southern route for Lend-Lease supplies from the Allies. Letting Hitler gain access to that resource and that route was unthinkable. So the USSR and Britain, putting old disagreements aside, launched a joint strike. Soviet troops came in from the north. British forces moved in from the south. The entire praised, modernized army Reza Shah had built, his life's work, simply vanished. Resistance barely existed. Soldiers scattered. Officers surrendered. The occupation took less than a week. It was a total, crushing defeat for his entire strategy. 20 years of radical reforms, forceful dismantling of traditions, and massive military spending, all of it proved meaningless against the harsh realities of geopolitics. For Reza Shah, it became a personal catastrophe. His allies forced him to abdicate in favor of his young son, Mohammad Reza, and then sent him into exile, where he died a few years later. The man who tried to wrest Iran's independence by force ended his days as an exile while his country fell back under foreign occupation. The humiliation he feared and fought so desperately to avoid hit him twice as hard. After the war, foreign troops withdrew, but one presence remained: the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, a giant controlling the country's greatest treasure, its black gold. The company paid Iran a laughably small share of the profits. It forced its workers into brutal conditions and acted like a state within a state, ignoring Iranian laws. Anger over this economic oppression built up for years. Then, in 1951, it found its voice. That voice belonged to Mohammad Mossadegh, an elderly, eccentric aristocrat elected prime minister. He did what no one dared before him. With a single stroke of his pen, he nationalized the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, declaring the oil the property of the Iranian people. It was an explosion. The whole country celebrated. Crowds in Tehran lifted Mossadegh onto their shoulders. It seemed the century-long humiliation had finally come to an end. But London and Washington saw it differently. For Britain, it struck at the last remnants of its imperial pride and economy. For the United States, gripped by Cold War paranoia, Mossadegh, who worked with local communists, looked like a man ready to hand Iran over to the Soviets. The West responded with a total blockade. Not a single tanker carrying Iranian oil could leave the Persian Gulf. The country's economy started to suffocate. Yet Mossadegh stood firm. That's when the CIA and Britain's MI6 launched Operation Ajax. This secret mission aimed to overthrow a democratically elected leader. Agents brought suitcases full of cash into the country. They bribed journalists to write defamatory articles. They paid gangs to stir up street riots, making the chaos seem real. They convinced the young, hesitant Shah Mohammad Reza to sign the order dismissing the prime minister. In August 1953, hired mobs flooded the streets. Army units loyal to the Shah seized control of key points across the capital. They stormed Mossadegh's house and arrested him. Iran's brief experiment with democracy ended in blood and betrayal. For an entire generation of Iranians, that day marked a point of no return. Their faith in Western ideals of justice and democracy was shattered. The United States, which claimed to bring freedom to the world, had actually toppled a legitimate government to protect oil interests. That wound never healed. It grew into a deep well of distrust and resentment, defining Iran's relationship with the West for decades to come. After the coup, Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi returned to his country no longer as a timid young man, but as an absolute monarch. one who owed his throne entirely to the Americans and the British. He learned a harsh lesson from 1953. Holding power requires not the people's love but their fear. With the CIA's help, he built one of the most brutal and far-reaching secret police forces in the world. SAVAK. This organization became a cancer, spreading metastases through every layer of Iranian society. SAVAK agents were everywhere, in universities, factories, coffee houses, even mosques. Any careless word, any criticism of the Shah or his American backers could bring a knock on the door in the dead of night. People simply vanished. They were taken away in unmarked cars, dragged into basements that everyone knew about, but no one dared to mention. Torture became routine. Electric shocks, nail-pulling, beatings, psychological torment. SAVAK wielded every tool to crush human will. Tens of thousands of Iranians passed through those dark cells. Many never came back. At the same time, the Shah launched the White Revolution, an ambitious reform program aimed at transforming Iran into a modern, thriving power. On the surface, the changes looked impressive. Women gained the right to vote, new hospitals and schools sprang up, and a campaign to fight illiteracy took off. Oil revenues, now shared more fairly with Western companies, flowed like a river. Tehran blossomed into a dazzling showcase. Its streets filled with the latest American cars. Store windows displayed the newest European fashions. The elite lived lavishly, hosting extravagant parties and snapping up real estate on the French Riviera. But beneath this glittering surface, a brutal reality lurked. Corruption soared to unimaginable levels. The Shah's family and inner circle treated the state treasury like their own personal wallet. The gap between the wealthy, westernized elite and the poor religious majority grew wider every single day. On the capital's streets, women drove cars in miniskirts. Meanwhile, in soundproofed SAVAK basements, students who dared to question the Shah's rule were beaten to death. Iran existed in two parallel realities, racing toward each other, gearing up for a head-on collision. The Shah's modernization was fast, costly, and shallow. It created a dazzling facade but left the foundation untouched. The technologies he imported, radio, television, cassette players, were meant to spread ideas of Western progress and glorify the monarchy. Instead, they turned into weapons against him. While state channels broadcast parades and touted economic successes, millions of Iranians at home tuned in to something very different. They listened to sermons. Clergy recorded their speeches on cheap audio cassettes that could be copied thousands of times. These voices didn't talk about GDP growth. They spoke of moral decay, injustice, and how the Shah had sold the country's soul to the great Satan, the United States. These tapes passed from hand to hand, city to village, weaving an invisible network of information that SAVAK couldn't control. It seemed that after removing Mossadegh and crushing all political parties, the Shah's power was absolute. But the real threat was brewing where secret police agents dared not dig too deep, inside mosques and religious schools. This is where an ideology took shape, offering an alternative to the Shah's dazzling but hollow reality. It spoke to the people in a language they understood: faith, honor, and justice. The surface gleamed with the neon glow of Western brands, and the economy was breaking records. Yet underground, cassette tapes circulated with the voice of a man preparing to erase this reality to dust. The revolution didn't start with a voice booming from an armored truck or a rallying speech to a roaring crowd. It came from a quiet suburb just outside Paris. And it wasn't carried by bullets or pamphlets, but by an ordinary cassette tape. A cheap piece of plastic with magnetic tape inside. The Shah was busy building nuclear power plants, buying phantom jets, and wrapping the country in a network of TV towers to broadcast parades and westerns. He believed in high technology, the power of steel and radio waves. That belief was his biggest mistake. Change arrived on a low-tech yet frighteningly effective medium. The exiled Ayatollah Khomeini, an old man with piercing eyes, simply recorded his sermons onto a cassette. Those recordings spread like a virus. People copied them, tape to tape, in thousands of shops and homes across Iran. The Imam's voice, crackling like old tape, filled taxis, tea houses, and bedrooms. He didn't talk about stock markets. He spoke of justice. Not about ballistic missiles, but about a faith that had been betrayed. The regime, which had poured billions into the most advanced surveillance system in the region, found itself powerless against this underground network. SAVAK could torture students and imprison poets, but it couldn't arrest a whisper copied millions of times. The technology the Shah believed would cement his power and symbolize progress turned against him. The Iron Throne of the monarchy didn't melt from fire. It dissolved under the weight of sound recorded on tape. In January 1979, when the Shah's plane soared into the sky, carrying the dictator out of the country for good, the streets erupted in celebration. But the euphoria of freedom quickly gave way to chaos. The state simply vanished. The army lost its will to fight, the police disappeared underground, and officials scattered. Into this power vacuum, new forces surged, like molten lava breaking through the surface. At every intersection outside every mosque, spontaneous revolutionary committees, known as comités, sprang up. Yesterday's students, shopkeepers, and unemployed, fiercely loyal to Khomeini and burning with hatred for the past, suddenly became judges, police, and executioners. They held trials on the spot, stormed homes, and made arrests. At the same time, from the ashes of the old army, a new ideological force took shape: the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. Its mission wasn't to guard borders, but to protect the revolution itself, from threats inside and out. Ubiquitous committees flooded the streets, backed by the iron fist of the Revolutionary Guard Corps. They quickly became the backbone of a new order. And this order began by tearing down the past completely. The first move rewrote secular family laws. In one stroke, they lowered the legal marriage age for girls, from 18 to 9 years old. This wasn't just a step backward. It was a plunge into the abyss, straight into the early Middle Ages. The law that once protected childhood was erased. It gave way to a rule that turned a 9-year-old child into a man's possession. The civilized facade that the Pahlavis had built over 50 years crumbled within weeks. Harsh decrees are one thing, but terror always wears a face. For secular Iran, that face was Farrokhroo Parsa. She embodied everything the new regime despised: a doctor, an educator, and the country's first female minister of education. She fought for girls' right to learn, opened schools, and pushed women into leadership roles. Under the Shah, she symbolized progress. Under the Ayatollah, she became a symbol of sin. They arrested her, accusing her of spreading prostitution and corrupting the land. Her trial was a show trial, an indictment of the country's entire secular past. Her execution was meant to send a message, and it did. Across the nation, chilling rumors spread. They said she wasn't just shot. That, as the embodiment of defiled femininity, she was sewn into a sack and hanged. No concrete evidence confirms this. But the fact that millions believed the story spoke louder about the new reality than any official verdict. The horror was so overwhelming, the most unbelievable seemed normal. Killing Farrokhroo Parsa wasn't just a murder. It was a ritual destruction of an era of hope, enlightenment, and rights. The revolution quickly turned on both its allies and its enemies. The country sank into bitter internal conflict. Factions, the Islamists, the leftists, the nationalists, who had stood shoulder to shoulder just yesterday to overthrow the Shah, now tore each other apart. The fragile new regime seemed on the verge of collapse, crushed under the weight of its own contradictions. It desperately needed a scapegoat, a strong external enemy, someone to unite the nation and justify any brutality. And that enemy didn't take long to show up. In September 1980, hundreds of Iraqi tanks crossed the border. Saddam Hussein, the ruler of neighboring Iraq, saw a chance to exploit the post-revolution chaos and seize Iran's oil-rich provinces. He bet on a swift and easy victory, but he severely miscalculated. The invasion turned out to be a gift for the Ayatollah's regime. Internal conflicts suddenly took a back seat. Yesterday's rivals united against a common invader. Khomeini declared a sacred war. Hundreds of thousands of volunteers flooded the front lines. Mobilization bypassed military offices. It happened straight from the mosques. This fight wasn't about land or borders, it was a battle for faith, for the nation's survival, for the revolution itself. The blood spilled at the border became the cement that sealed cracks in the foundation of the Islamic Republic forever. The conflict quickly spiraled into a brutal slaughter. 8 years of trench warfare, like something ripped from the darkest chapters of World War I. Chemical attacks, rocket strikes pounding cities. Iran threw wave after wave of poorly armed teenage militia from the Besieged, sending them to clear minefields with their own bodies. Iraq responded with relentless carpet bombing. both sides pushed themselves to the brink. When the ceasefire came in 1988, the front line barely moved from where it started. 8 years of war, 500,000 lives lost on both sides, an entire generation of young men buried in the ground, all for nothing. The borders didn't shift an inch, but while the map stayed the same, the mindset of Iran's leadership was forever changed. This war became a brutal yet incredibly effective school of survival for the regime. When the world imposed a weapons embargo on Iran, the country learned to bypass every sanction. It built underground supply channels and launched its own military production. Meanwhile, both the West and the Soviet Union openly backed Iraq. Iran took away one crucial lesson. In this world, you can only count on yourself. It mastered the art of asymmetric warfare, relying not on numbers but on skill. Out of the trenches of that conflict emerged the proxy force doctrine, creating and supporting Shiite militias abroad to fight your battles with someone else's hands. 8 years of brutal fighting didn't gain Iran an inch of land, but they gave it something far more valuable. A unique survival strategy in total isolation, and a ready-made formula for turning weakness into strength. The war ended in a stalemate, leaving behind hundreds of thousands of graves and a nation hardened by complete isolation. But how did this besieged fortress manage to extend its reach across the entire Middle East, and come so close to creating the ultimate weapon? The besieged fortress didn't just survive complete isolation. It transformed that isolation into the most formidable political doctrine in the modern Middle East. The secret behind how this pariah state managed to instill fear in the region's most powerful armies lies buried deep beneath layers of rock. The Zagros Mountains, the Fordo complex. Hundreds of feet of solid granite stand ready to absorb a direct strike from American bunker-buster bombs. Behind steel blast doors several feet thick, a relentless, maddening high-frequency hum fills the air. The sound of spinning rotors. Thousands of centrifuges, crafted from high-strength aluminum and carbon fiber, spin at speeds far beyond the speed of sound. They carry out an invisible yet deadly task: isotope separation. Natural uranium contains less than 1% of the crucial isotope 235. To power a civilian nuclear plant and light up homes, that concentration must rise to 3 to 5%. Today, Iran enriches uranium up to 60%, while a bomb requires 90%. A 30% difference might look like a huge gap, but the physics tell a different story. Uranium enrichment isn't a straight path. It's more like climbing a sheer cliff. The biggest chunks of time, energy, and complex technology go into raising the concentration from 1% to 20%. Moving from 20 to 60% demands an enormous effort from the country's entire scientific community. But once they hit that 60% mark, the hardest part is over. From there, the state only faces a short, rapid push to build a fully functional nuclear warhead. The final sprint to the summit. This sudden surge turned a regional Middle Eastern conflict into a global nightmare. World powers imposed unprecedented economic sanctions. Intelligence agencies unleashed complex computer viruses into Iran's control systems. Viruses designed to tear centrifuges apart from the inside. In the streets of Tehran, leading nuclear physicists were assassinated with satellite-controlled machine guns. Yet nothing stopped the rotors from spinning. The Islamic Republic edged dangerously close to a red line, transforming its threshold status into a blunt instrument of blackmail. The nuclear program became an impenetrable shield for the regime, guaranteeing protection from any direct military invasion. One shield wasn't enough to dominate the region. The trenches of the Iran-Iraq War taught the Ayatollahs a crucial survival rule: never fight on your own soil. Iran needed a sword, one that could reach enemies thousands of miles from its borders. So, they forged that sword by building an invisible empire of proxy forces. The architect behind this empire preferred to stay in the shadows, a commander of the elite Quds force within the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. He didn't lead armored divisions or launch fighter jets. His weapon was instability in other countries. He sought out Shiite minorities, war-torn militias, and radical groups in neighboring nations, supplying them with money, rockets, and ideology. This asymmetric warfare strategy let Tehran control entire countries through other hands. Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, dozens of armed militias across Iraq and Syria, they all became limbs of one vast network. This strategy made the general the most dangerous man in the Middle East, but it also sealed his fate. It was the night of January 3rd at Baghdad's International Airport. Two vehicles sped away from the terminal. High above, several thousand feet up, an attack drone circled silently, invisible to anyone on the ground. Half a world away, an operator tracked heat signatures. Missiles launched. The strike turned the armored SUVs into twisted, burning wreckage. They could only identify the shadowy commander by the large silver ring with a red stone on his severed hand. The assassination of General Qasem Soleimani by an American drone in 2020 marked the peak of tensions with the United States. The world holds its breath on the brink of a global conflict. Iran launches a massive rocket strike on the American military base at Ain al-Assad in Iraq. An unprecedented move, a direct and open attack by a state on United States forces. No one dared to do this for decades. At the last moment, both sides stepped back from the edge of disaster. But the regime claims an ideological victory. The besieged fortress proved it could strike the planet's leading superpower and walk away unpunished. From the outside, the Islamic Republic looked like an unbreakable monolith of steel and religious fanaticism, able to withstand any pressure. But the illusion of invulnerability always shatters from within. The state funneled billions into ballistic missiles, funded mercenary armies abroad, and built underground nuclear bunkers. It prepared for war with the outside world. The real existential threat came from a different place, a young woman from the streets of the capital. Tehran. September. The heat blends with the heavy stench of exhaust fumes. White and green vans from the morality police patrol the streets at a slow pace. Their sole mission, strict enforcement of the Islamic dress code. 22-year-old Mahsa Amini was taken in for a trivial reason. Her hijab was worn incorrectly, a few strands of hair escaping from beneath the scarf. They force her into the van and drive her to the station for what they call a clarification conversation. She never leaves that building on her own 2 feet. Coma, hospital room, cardiac arrest. Officials claim she suffered a sudden illness, but the streets tell a different story. Her death in 2022 sparked the largest protests in decades. Decades of pent-up anger explode with a raw, primal force. This isn't just a protest over gas prices anymore. It's a deep, emotional uprising. Women across the country climb onto car roofs, tearing off mandatory headscarves and throwing them into bonfires right in the streets. They cut their hair in public squares under the watchful eyes of cameras. The chant, "Woman, Life, Freedom," echoes from the shores of the Caspian Sea to the Persian Gulf. History comes full circle. In the 19th century, women in the Shah's harem shattered their precious hookahs in protest, breaking the tobacco monopoly. Now, their great-great-granddaughters burn symbols of state control, defying the regime's monopoly over their own bodies. The authorities respond with the only language they know. Guards from the Revolutionary Corps flood the streets. Gunfire cracks through the air. Tear gas clouds the squares. Thousands are thrown into the notorious Evin prison. The state manages to crush the street protests with brute force. But fear never returns. The wall of terror that once propped up domestic politics cracks beyond repair. The regime's most dangerous fault line doesn't run along barricades. It cuts right through schoolyards. For 40 years, the Islamic Republic built a perfect brainwashing machine. They erased any mention of a secular past from textbooks. Prayer became mandatory. Every morning, millions of children lined up, forced to chant hateful mantras against the West in unison. But the machine broke down right before its creator's eyes. In Iranian schools, students have been caught responding to slogans like "Death to America" with "Death to Palestine," a direct protest against spending the nation's budget on foreign wars. The director, microphone in hand, shouts the usual line, expecting a submissive echo. Instead, an utterly unimaginable response flies straight at the face of the state ideology. It's teenagers in strict school uniforms shouting back. This protest has nothing to do with anti-Semitism or hatred toward the Arab population. It's pure, concentrated rebellion against their own country's hypocrisy. Kids see a reality that television tries to hide behind patriotic reports. The national currency is free-falling. Inflation is devouring their parents' savings. School teachers have to juggle 3 jobs just to afford meat. Meanwhile, state channels boast about millions of dollars sent to support armed groups in Gaza, Beirut, and Damascus. The students' slogan couldn't be clearer. Stop paying for other people's wars with our lives, leave foreign lands alone, and take care of your own country. This new generation never experienced the trauma of revolution or the war with Iraq. They openly challenged the rules of the besieged fortress. Born with the internet at their fingertips, they use tools to bypass censorship and glimpse the world beyond the Iron Curtain. They see how their peers live in neighboring secular states. They don't seek nuclear weapons. They don't want regional dominance at the cost of poverty and isolation. The ideological foundation of the theocracy has crumbled to dust. The authorities can force them to wear uniforms, but they can't force them to believe. Iran's history is full of brutal paradoxes. The last Shah sat behind a polished desk, trying with a single stroke of his pen to rewrite time, linking his rule to the glory of the Persian Empire. But he failed, losing touch with the reality of his own people. Today's leaders are making the same fatal mistake. They built a powerful military machine that demands the world's attention, yet they lost control over their own country. 2,500 years ago, the Achaemenid Empire conquered Babylon and became the first global superpower, not just through military might, but through unprecedented tolerance. Ancient Persian kings granted conquered peoples religious freedom and the right to live by their own laws. The modern Iranian state, standing on that very land, survives only by enforcing a rigid, uniform doctrine. It terrifies its neighbors, but it lives in constant fear of its own children. Iran is more than just a political regime. It's an incredibly resilient civilization. It survived the armies of Alexander the Great. It kept its language and identity under the harsh rule of the Arab Caliphate. It stood strong through devastating Mongol invasions. It absorbed British and Russian interference. The current theocracy is just one chapter in this endless story. From the outside, the walls of this besieged fortress still look impenetrable. But the foundation beneath is crumbling. The future of this ancient land won't be shaped by generals hiding in underground bunkers. It will be written by a generation that has finally stopped fearing.